After South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas seceded, the seceding states immediately seized the federal property, including forts, arsenals, and government offices within their boundaries. They did not have enough men at first to seize Fort Sumter and Pickens, but in 1861, when Union forces were running out of supplies at Fort Sumter, the Confederates had the opportunity to act. Lincoln did not want to surrender to the Confederates after his inaugural speech spoke of keeping the federal property, so he quickly sent supplies to avoid abandoning the fort. The Confederates chose to risk violence in order to not appear cowardly. The Confederates, under the leadership of General Beauregard, bombarded the fort for 2 days before Union forces finally surrendered. This was the start of the Civil War. In preparing for the war, Abraham Lincoln knew he would ignore inconvenient parts of the Constitution. He said it would be foolish to lose the whole country in favor of a part. An example of this would include sending troops into battle without authority from Congress for a formal declaration of war. Lincoln defended this action by calling the conflict a domestic insurrection. He believed calling for a declaration of war would mean recognizing the Confederacy as an independent nation. Another instance of Lincoln ignoring the Constitution would be the increasing of the size of the regular army and setting up a naval blockade of the South. Progressing into the war, African Americans held a significant role in supporting the Union cause. Over 180,000 African Americans served as soldiers, sailors, and laborers. In the beginning, African Americans were largely excluded from the military. Only a few black regiments formed in the Union-occupied areas of the South. However, after Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, black enlistment increased rapidly and the Union began to actively recruit African American soldiers in both the North and the South. Mistreatment of black soldiers was a large problem during the war, and inequality was prevalent. Many African American soldiers were overworked and underpaid. Further raising the risk, black fighting men captured by the Confederates were not exchanged by the North, but instead sent back to their masters if they were escaped slaves or, more often, executed. Although it is believed that the Southern states were cohesive about their decisions at the approaching time of the Civil War, there were divisions. There was the group that was the pro-slavery, but the backcountry farmers did not rely on slavery, and therefore had little support for the South. The choice in Confederate government affected their ideas on helping the South as well. Not only was the idea opposed, but it led to some Southerners helping the Union in the war. The Southern blockade prevented the South from getting imported goods. The South was agricultural and mostly produced cotton, so there was not enough food to support its own needs. Inflammation led to instability in Southern society, which caused many riots to turn violent. Confederate leaders who were afraid of slave revolts during the war tightened slave codes. Even so, many slaves near the war front found ways to escape. Slaves who could not escape seemed to their owners at least resistant during the war due to increased women authority. The Confederates tried to get the 5 civilized tribes to ally with them. Some supported the South because they were slaveholders and resented the U.S. government. Others supported the North due to hostility towards slavery both in American and their own society. Indian regiments fought for both the North and South, but had no official alliance. There were many battles which occurred throughout the Civil War. In 1861, the first major battle between the Union and the Confederacy was in northern Virginia. It was known as the First Battle of Bull Run, or Manassas. This battle was important because it changed the mindset of Union leaders, who expected the war to end quickly if their army crushed the opposition. The Confederates received reinforcements, and both armies had even numbers, where beforehand the Confederates were slightly outnumbered, and they later on won the battle. This dispelled the hope of a brief war. The Union later on came back with victories which were vital to the course of battle. The capture of cities such as New Orleans and Shiloh also contributed to the war effort because of their values as trading hubs. The Union had more success in the West than the North. There were 3 major turning points: Vicksburg, Gettysburg, and Chattanooga. In the Battle of Vicksburg, Ulysses S. Grant attacked the Confederacy from behind and placed them under siege. After 6 weeks, the Confederacy surrendered, giving the Union entire control over the Mississippi River. The Confederacy was divided in half because of this. The Battle of Gettysburg was the bloodiest battle in the entire war. General Lee ordered a charge known as the Pickett Charge. However, he lost a third of his army and had to retreat. They were never able to recover from the damages of this battle. In the Battle of Chattanooga, Bragg was cutting off fresh supplies to the Union forces, so Grant had to come to the rescue. He immediately took control of the situation by gathering Union forces from other portions of the West and combining them with reinforcements from the East. Grant won a resounding victory, which put the Union forces in a position for a drive into Georgia. On April 9, 1865, Lee surrendered to Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse. The North's victory was not just a military one, but it also strengthened its economy, giving spurt to industry and railroad development. The South was greatly weakened by the destruction of millions of dollars of property and the depleting of the young male population. Southerners had gone to war out of fear that the North was dominating, and ironically the war itself strengthened that dominance. Most importantly, the Civil War was a victory for African Americans, whose plight the conflict had begun in the first place. The war led to Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, and later the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. It encouraged slaves to free themselves, desert their masters, and seek refuge behind Union lines.